He laughed while signing the divorce papers, like this was nothing more than a joke to him. It wasn't nervous or awkward. It was confident, careless, almost proud. Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his chair, pen still in his hand, and looked straight at me with that same smile he used every time he thought he was smarter than everyone else in the room. To him, this was already over. I sat quietly across the table. My hands were steady. I didn't argue. I didn't look angry or broken the way he expected. That seemed to amuse him even more. He glanced at his lawyer, then back at me, shaking his head as if he had escaped something heavy. The sound of his laugh echoed in the room, sharp and disrespectful. The judge flipped through the documents slowly. The room smelled like old paper and coffee. No one spoke. Ethan kept smiling, tapping his fingers, relaxed. He believed the paperwork was just a formality, before he walked out free and untouched. Then the judge stopped turning pages. She looked up, adjusted her glasses, and spoke in a calm, firm voice. She said that before anything could be finalized, there was something important that needed to be reviewed. She mentioned my name. She mentioned finances. The air changed. Ethan's fingers stopped moving. His smile froze just for a second. He leaned forward slightly, confused but still confident, like this was a small delay, nothing more. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He still thought he knew the ending. The judge asked for confirmation. Papers were lifted. Numbers were about to be spoken. That was the moment his laughter disappeared. And for the first time that day, the room felt quiet in a way that made even Ethan uncomfortable. For 9 years, people believed our marriage was solid. Rowan Hale and Ethan Caldwell looked like a couple who had everything figured out. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where lawns were trimmed and neighbors waved politely. We paid our bills on time. We showed up to family events together. There were no loud fights, no public scenes, nothing that hinted something was wrong. From the outside, it looked calm and normal. Inside the house, things slowly changed. It didn't happen all at once. Ethan didn't wake up one day and turn cold. It came in small moments that were easy to ignore at first. The way he started correcting me in front of others. The way he interrupted when I spoke, then laughed it off like it was nothing serious. He began reminding me, often, that he was the one paying for most things. If we disagreed, he would mention money. If I questioned a decision, he would say I didn't understand how things worked. It wasn't yelling or insults. It was quieter than that, but heavier. Little by little, he took control of decisions that used to be shared. Where money went. What plans made sense. What risks were too emotional. When I pushed back, he said I was overthinking. When I stayed silent, he took that as agreement. Friends saw stability. Family saw comfort. No one noticed how often I started doubting myself. No one heard the tone in his voice when doors were closed. He wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He was confident, and that confidence left no room for mine. Over time, respect faded. Not with a fight, but with indifference. I became someone he talked over, not with. Someone he managed, not partnered with. By the time I realized what was happening, it already felt normal to him. And that was the most dangerous part. The betrayal didn't come with another woman or a sudden confession. It arrived quietly, hidden behind everyday choices. At first, I noticed small things that didn't make sense. A bill paid from a different account. A balance that looked lower than it should have. When I asked about it, Ethan brushed it off like it wasn't worth discussing. He started making money decisions on his own. Transfers I didn't recognize. Accounts I wasn't fully aware of. He didn't ask for my opinion anymore. He would say he was handling things, and that I didn't need to worry about it. The way he said it made it clear the conversation was over. When I pressed for details, his tone changed. He told me I was being emotional. He said I was overreacting and turning nothing into a problem. If I asked again, he sighed and reminded me that he understood finances better. He liked to say he was just doing what made sense as the man of the house. I started to feel foolish for even asking. Every question was met with impatience. Every concern was treated like a personal flaw. He didn't explain. He dismissed. And over time, that dismissal became routine. Money became something he controlled, not something we shared. Information became something he decided I deserved, not something I had a right to. He never raised his voice, but the message was always clear. Trust him and stay quiet. I noticed how careful he was with his words around others, and how different he sounded when we were alone. That contrast made me realize this wasn't care or protection. It was control. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't leave bruises or evidence others could see. It left confusion. And it grew stronger every time I was told my concerns didn't matter. I didn't find out all at once. The truth came together slowly, like pieces that didn't want to fit. A document left open on his laptop. A name of a lawyer I didn't recognize. Dates that went back much further than I expected. When I looked deeper, my hands started to shake. This wasn't recent. Ethan had been preparing for divorce for more than a year. He had spoken to lawyers. He had organized his accounts. He had moved money carefully, quietly, always just enough to avoid attention. Everything had been planned. While I was still trying to fix what felt broken, he had already decided to walk away and take as much as he could with him. The hardest part wasn't the planning. It was realizing how calmly he had lived beside me while doing it. Shared meals. Casual conversations. Normal mornings. All of it happened while he was preparing to leave me with almost nothing. I confronted him that same night. I didn't yell. I didn't cry at first. I asked him directly if it was true. He didn't look surprised. He didn't apologize. He leaned back and listened like I was confirming something he already knew. When I asked how he could do this without telling me, he shrugged. He said it was practical. He said this was how things worked. Then he said the words that ended everything. He told me I would be fine. He said I didn't really contribute anyway. There was no anger in his voice. No guilt. Just certainty. As if my years beside him meant nothing. As if support, patience, and trust had no value unless they came with a paycheck he respected. In that moment, something broke cleanly inside me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for clarity to enter. I stopped explaining. I stopped asking why. I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision he had made long ago. And standing there, listening to him dismiss my entire presence so easily, I understood there was nothing left to save. What Ethan never noticed was how much of my life existed outside his attention. He saw my silence as weakness. He saw my calm as dependence. He never asked why I stayed up late some nights, working quietly while the house was asleep. He never questioned why I kept certain things to myself. I had my own accounts. Not secret, but separate. I didn't announce them because I didn't feel the need to. When we first talked about money years ago, I chose not to combine everything. Ethan didn't argue much. He took it as hesitation, maybe insecurity. He assumed I didn't fully trust myself with financial decisions. I let him believe that. When he took control of shared expenses, I focused elsewhere. I built slowly, carefully, without drawing attention. I learned what needed to be protected and what could stay visible. I didn't do it out of spite or fear. I did it because I believed in being prepared. Even inside a marriage. There were nights when I stayed up reviewing documents, checking numbers, planning quietly. Not because I expected things to fall apart, but because I knew people change. Ethan never asked what I was doing. He assumed I was distracted or anxious. He underestimated how intentional those moments were. I never corrected his assumptions. Correcting them would have invited questions I wasn't ready to answer. So I stayed quiet. I listened more than I spoke. I paid attention when he stopped including me in decisions. What he called insecurity was actually awareness. What he dismissed as overthinking was protection. I wasn't hiding anything illegal or dishonest. I was simply making sure I could stand on my own if I ever had to. Ethan thought control came from confidence and money. He believed power was loud. He didn't understand that sometimes the strongest position is built quietly, without asking for approval. By the time he made his plans, mine were already in place. The day Ethan filed for divorce, he walked in with that same self-assured look he always wore. Confident. Certain. Like this was the final act of a play he had already written. He expected drama, tears, anger, begging, something to prove I was dependent on him. I didn't give him that. I signed the papers quietly, without hesitation. My hand didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I answered the clerk's questions with calm clarity. I didn't make excuses, I didn't argue. I simply followed the steps, one by one, and let the process happen. I could see the confusion cross his face. For a moment he hesitated, unsure if I was serious or in denial. I stayed composed. I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't trying to manipulate him. I was just present, steady, controlled. He tried to smile through it, to cover the small flicker of doubt forming in his eyes. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering, shaking his head as if to say, "She doesn't understand yet." I didn't correct him. I let him keep thinking that. He didn't realize that this calm wasn't ignorance. It was observation. It was strategy. He assumed I was reacting slowly, giving myself time to break down. But in reality, I had already made my choices. I had already protected myself. I had already planned for this moment. He expected chaos. He expected weakness. Instead, I gave him certainty. I gave him a quiet, steady version of myself that refused to be shaken. And though he smiled, I could see it falter in glimpses. That subtle shift, that tiny crack, was the first sign he had underestimated me completely. For Ethan, the divorce filing was supposed to be a victory. For me, it was simply a step I had already been ready to take. Ethan walked into the courtroom like he owned the place. He joked quietly with his lawyer, tapping his pen against the table, leaning back in his chair. The kind of relaxed, smug confidence that comes from believing the outcome is already decided. He smiled at me across the room, as if to say, "This is over. You'll regret leaving me." I sat quietly, keeping my hands folded in my lap, listening while the judge called the session to order. Ethan didn't notice how calm I was. He didn't notice the way my eyes followed every movement, every paper the lawyers handed over. When the judge asked for full financial disclosure from both sides, Ethan barely raised an eyebrow. He had already assumed my documents were small, scattered, unimportant. He expected a few minor accounts, maybe a savings account or two. Nothing that would change the balance in his favor. I handed over my paperwork without hesitation. No hesitation, no trembling hands, no unnecessary explanation. The documents were organized, complete, and honest. They included accounts he didn't know existed, investments he assumed were insignificant, and records of money he had never noticed. Ethan's smirk stayed in place, but there was a flicker in his eyes he tried to hide. He shuffled papers nervously, looking to his lawyer for reassurance. He hadn't prepared for this. He hadn't expected me to have built something separate, something strong enough to matter in court. The judge scanned the documents, asked a few pointed questions, and the air in the room shifted. Ethan's confidence, the same confidence he had relied on for years, began to waver. For the first time that day, the power in the courtroom didn't feel like it belonged to him. It had quietly shifted, and he hadn't even realized it yet. When my attorney handed over the documents, Ethan didn't know what he was about to see. I had prepared every detail carefully over the years, keeping everything legal and above board. Multiple accounts. Long-term investments. A trust that had been established before our marriage. All of it completely protected. All of it substantial. As the papers were passed to the judge, Ethan leaned forward, curious but still confident. He thought he knew everything about my finances. He thought he had me figured out. Then the numbers were read aloud. Slowly, deliberately. Each account, each investment, each figure was listed. The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that makes everyone feel the weight of what's being revealed. Ethan's pen stopped tapping. His smile faltered. He glanced at his lawyer, then back at me, trying to understand how this had happened. He had assumed that leaving me would leave him in control. That I had no separate resources, no hidden strength. He hadn't noticed how careful I had been, how patient, how deliberate. Every late night, every quiet decision, every choice to protect myself had built toward this exact moment. The judge looked over the documents, raising her eyebrows slightly, and asked a few questions. Ethan stumbled through his answers, trying to regain confidence, but it wasn't there. The numbers didn't lie. They spoke louder than anything he had said or done. I sat still, calm, watching him realize for the first time that he had miscalculated completely. His plan, his confidence, his smug certainty, it was all crumbling quietly in front of him. The balance sheet didn't just show money. It showed control, independence, and the consequence of underestimating someone who never needed to announce her strength. And in that courtroom, the shift was clear. He was no longer in charge. I was. Ethan laughed again, a short, nervous laugh, thinking the judge was exaggerating. He leaned back, trying to cover the sudden tension in his shoulders, still hoping this was just a minor hiccup. But as the judge repeated the figures, carefully emphasizing each account, his smile froze. "Is that correct?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. His confident tone was gone, replaced with disbelief. He looked at the papers in front of him, then at his lawyer, then finally at me. For the first time, he didn't see the wife he thought he knew. He saw a stranger, someone he had completely misjudged. He tried to laugh again, but it sounded hollow. The room was quiet, and everyone could feel the shift. His arrogance, the kind that had filled our house for years, was gone. He no longer knew how to respond. Every joke, every smug comment, every plan he had made suddenly seemed small, insignificant, and meaningless. I watched him closely, not saying a word. There was no gloating, no triumph. I didn't have to. His own realization spoke louder than anything I could have said. He had assumed I would be unprepared, weak, panicked, or desperate. He had expected tears, confusion, or begging. Instead, he faced the truth calmly and without warning. For the first time, Ethan understood that his plan had failed. That his years of control, his careful calculations, his sense of superiority, all of it, had been built on an assumption that was completely wrong. And in that courtroom, in that exact moment, I saw the collapse of the man who thought he had already won. The confident, untouchable Ethan Caldwell had vanished, replaced by someone trying desperately to grasp a reality he never saw coming. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. And he felt the cost. The judge's tone sharpened as she asked Ethan to explain several transfers he had made over the past year. Money moved quietly, without my knowledge. He shifted in his seat, flipping through papers nervously, trying to make it sound routine, legal, normal. But it wasn't. Every answer he gave sounded smaller, weaker, less believable. What he had planned to be clever and hidden now looked like manipulation, like dishonesty layered over arrogance. Each explanation he stumbled through made the courtroom feel heavier, and every eye in the room seemed to notice the change. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I had already handed over everything: the accounts, the investments, the trust, the clear record of my finances. My documents were precise, complete, and untouchable. They didn't shout, they didn't dramatize, but they carried far more weight than anything he could argue. The judge leaned over the bench, eyes sharp, looking from Ethan to me and back again. Questions that seemed casual at first now carried judgment. Ethan's smirk had disappeared. His posture was tighter, his words faltering. The careful plan he had spent months building, the secret transfers, the hope of leaving me with nothing, all of it was crumbling under the light of truth. I remained calm, collected, and silent. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to make a point. The numbers and records spoke louder than any emotion could. Every hidden move he had counted on as his advantage now highlighted his miscalculation. For the first time in years, Ethan had no words. His preparation, his control, and his confidence were stripped away in real time. The truth didn't yell. It didn't rush. It simply stood there, undeniable, and made him face a reality he had refused to see. And in that silence, I realized power didn't come from scheming. It came from being ready for the moment when the truth mattered most. When the courtroom finally quieted, I didn't cheer. I didn't smile or make a show. Ethan sat there, stunned, trying to grasp what had just happened, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I stayed calm, steady, and in control. I gathered my things slowly, deliberately, letting every movement show confidence without words. My financial security was undeniable. My independence was clear. I didn't need to boast or argue. The truth of what I had built, quietly and carefully over the years, was enough. Ethan looked at me, searching for a crack, something to exploit, but there was none. The same man who had laughed at the thought of my strength now saw it standing right in front of him. I didn't need to humiliate him. I didn't need to make him look small. His realization did that for me. Walking out of that courtroom, every step was deliberate. I felt the weight of freedom, not anger. I felt the satisfaction of clarity, not revenge in the usual sense. What mattered wasn't the money. What mattered was proving, quietly and completely, that I had never been beneath him. He had assumed I was weak, dependent, or helpless. He had planned to walk away with control and superiority. And yet, when the dust settled, it was he who was left questioning, doubting, and exposed. My revenge wasn't in confrontation or words. It was in the quiet strength I had built and the dignity I carried with me. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to make a scene. I simply lived with the knowledge that I had been ready, prepared, and unshakable all along. And that was enough. More than enough. More than he ever expected. And more than he could ever take from me. Months passed after the divorce, and life settled into a new rhythm. I didn't feel the need to flaunt what had happened in court or prove anything to anyone. The victory wasn't about wealth or accounts. It was about knowing I had trusted myself all along quietly, while Ethan had assumed he could control everything around him. I spent my days focusing on my own life, my own work, and my own peace. The house felt lighter, the air clearer, and every decision I made reminded me of the strength I had carried silently for years. There was no rush to prove my independence. It had already been shown in the most important way. Through preparation, calm, and consistency. Ethan's absence became a quiet presence in my life. I didn't think about revenge or humiliation anymore, because the court had done what needed to be done. The lessons I learned from him, the way people underestimate others, the way arrogance can blind a person, stayed with me as a kind of guide. I knew I would never ignore the signs again. And I would never rely on someone else's sense of fairness to protect me. Sometimes I imagined what it must have felt like for him. For someone so confident, so certain, to realize too late that his assumptions were wrong. That the person he believed weak was the one who had quietly prepared to withstand anything. I didn't dwell on it, but the thought reminded me that true strength doesn't need recognition. The divorce had ended legally, but its real impact lasted much longer. It wasn't about money or pride. It was about clarity, dignity, and the quiet knowledge that I had never been beneath him. And while he may have forgotten the small details over time, the lesson of underestimating me, the quiet, steady, unwavering force I carried, remained with him long after the papers were signed.
Some stories don't end, they follow you. If this one stayed in your mind, you know what to do.